photo of your great-grandfather's car. The year's 1910, and you can see him in the open air. All 4 cylinders chattering at a then incredible 30 horsepower. Or you know that picture your grandfather proudly displays of his wartime buddies in London on weekend leave? Without their uniforms, only the pre-war MG they stood beside gave a clue to the happier times just a few years before. Maybe it was your senior year of college. You drove an old MG for the summer but dreamed about a Porsche Speedster like this one. The girls would never be able to refuse a ride in this dream car. And in November, would you vote for Kennedy or Nixon for president? Or maybe your memories are of 25 years ago, when Carroll Shelby took the Mustang, America's great pony car, and turned it into this fire-breathing monster. And soon on road courses across the country, you'd see cars like this racing in the Trans Am series. It's that fascination that brings us here to witness a reunion of these great cars in the quaint New England countryside. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the northwest corner of Connecticut, Lime Rock Park, the site of the 8th Annual BMW Vintage Fall Festival. The noise and din behind me has been going on here since 1957 as we recreate great racing with some of history's most famous race cars and drivers. I'm Mike Joy, and with me is one of those great drivers, David Hobbs from Britain. So many British cars here and great fun. Glad to have you here.
Thanks, Mike. I may not be a vintage, but I'm certainly a veteran, and I've already seen some beautiful cars in the paddock, many of which I used to race from Formula Juniors to BMWs, and I'm going to be taking a close look at some of those BMWs that North America raced here, and also at the BMW collection of art cars, where they combine fine art with fine engineering. We're going to look at the Austin Healey team from Britain, who spent their summer in North America, and this is their last port of call before turning to Europe. And we're going to look at some other little interesting sidelights here at Lime Rock.
A man who's put a lot of laps on this racetrack is the chief instructor for the Skip Barber Racing School, Carl Lopez, the 3rd member of our team. Carl?
Thanks, Mike. I'm going to have a chance to spend my time in the paddock this weekend, take a close look at some of these beautiful race cars, and get a chance to talk to some of the drivers and the fans here this weekend.
Welcome back to Lime Rock Park for the BMW Vintage Fall Festival. Really great crowd out here to enjoy beautiful fall weather as we recreate some great races, including Lime Rock's historic 1970 Trans Am event. David will have a look at some of the cars that contributed to that great history.
That's right, Mike. For example, look at this 1970 AMC Javelin, one of the original cars in the Trans Am race here at Lime Rock Park, driven by Mark Donoghue, with a 5-litre 305 engine, putting out about 450 horsepower, giving true meaning to the word muscle car.
Current owner Brooke Mosgrove did not find the car in this condition. He had a lot of work to do to bring it back.
Kind of looked like everyone that walked by it took a big swipe at it. It was really pretty well cobbed up, and it had been turned into a GT1 race car. In fact, it measures 75 inches across the front flares, and at that time it was 84 inches wide. So you can imagine what it looked like. The whole interior was gone. It was all aluminum and had been turned into a later style Javelin. Actually, it took 18 months to put it back together, and that included 2 months out for a hernia, which was caused by this car. It was set up high off the ground. I had to climb over all the bars all the time, so that kind of slowed me down for a couple of months, but we got right back into it, and it was done in the fall of '87 then. Other than that, unfortunately, we're sitting here with a broken ring on the number 6 cylinder, so we'll probably not be doing anything but blowing oil all over the place now.
Here's a car that was campaigned by the Shelby team, the winner of the 1969 Trans Am race at Lime Rock, at the hands of Sam Posey. And Sam will run the car this weekend.
Well, Sam made his mark in Trans Am racing. Of course, he's a local from here at Sharon, Connecticut, but he retired in the mid-70s and hasn't been seen in a race car since. But he stays close to racing with his work as a commentator for ABC, and Sam remembers what made the Trans Am series so exciting.
See, what I think made the Trans Am, gave it that extra something. Charisma is an overused word, but it's something like that. Was that it was really a conflict between 2 different ways of going racing. We have the sports car guys like Mark Donoghue and Dan Gurney, the best of them. But then we had Parnelli Jones, and with Parnelli, his kind of sidekick there, George Fulmer, who was no sidekick. He was a great, great talent. Those guys, Jones and Fulmer, came at it a little bit differently. They were very aggressive. They set the tone for running into the other guy and really slam bam, thank you ma'am racing. And what I think made it so special was that the sporty car guys learned a lot from them, and it turned out they learned something from us. When I say us, I really mean Mark Donahue probably more than anybody. But it was like two factions, two sides of racing that came together in a high-stakes battle. Lasted only 2 years, reached a kind of pinnacle, and then almost fell apart under of its own weight. But while it lasted, it was the best racing going on in America. A Trans Am car left to its own devices would just go straight off the road. It has no innate sense of balance and handiness. You have to force it to do what you want it to do. And you really undergo a personality transplant when you get into a Trans Am car. First of all, you know you're pretty safe. You've got frame tubes all around you. It's really loud. I mean, the exhausts just blare out on either side of you. I used to be deaf at the end of the race, literally deaf. When we'd call home to my mother to tell her how I'd done, I had to have someone else place the call. I just couldn't talk on the telephone. You had to get really tough. I mean, it was like being a gunfighter with a pair of 6-shooters. You felt that the other guy was going to be willing to run into you because they didn't care, and you had to be willing to run into them. So it was a different kind of thing. It was really taking charge of an automobile. I personally, I just can't be around a racing car without wanting to race it, without wanting to do my best. Now, I assume I haven't raced in 10 years, that my best today is not as good as it once was. I'm deluding myself to think that most of the ingredients still seem to be there. The desire to win is there as much as it ever was. You don't lose that because you're trying to be successful in other walks of life. So that all those connections are still there. But I don't know exactly how this race is going to develop, but it's going to be far more of a race than a recreation. I guarantee it.
Posey will have to work hard to duplicate his win of 21 years ago, and here's one of the contenders. The car driven by Mark Donahue in the 67 Trans Am Series. The 5-liter Camaro engine pumps out 440 horsepower.
Well, this was a team car for Roger Penske, and the owner, Patrick Ryan, will tell you how he bought it for nostalgic reasons and a little bit about the car's history.
Both of these cars have a well-documented history. They're very opposite. The Penske car is actually a team car that placed third in the Sebring 68 race behind 2 prototypes. It was first in class. It was a well-known car. The yellow car was driven by and also ran. It ran in the back of the pack for a number of years in the early Trans Am. The Sunoco Camaro we've wanted for years because Mark Donahue is our hero, and we've named our team the Unfair Advantage Racing Team in tribute to his book, The Unfair Advantage. It's taken a year and a half to get them to the level that they're at right this minute, and then it's an ongoing thing because with race cars, parts are always breaking or needing to be replaced or panels are getting dented, so you really never get finished. I think the Trans Am was special because it took it was a series for pony cars that people could identify with strongly, and these cars, you could drive your Camaro in the street and then go watch Mark Donahue whip everybody with his Camaro.
Where do you find the great parts to bring these cars back? At the Lime Rock Auto Jumble. We'll visit it when we return to the BMW Vintage Fall Festival. Welcome back to Lime Rock Park. I'm sure you've heard of the term heel and toe downshifting. I'll bet you've never tried it this way.
In this 1932 Alfa Romeo Grand Prix car, doing a double clutch heel and toe downshift is an entirely different thing. Let's take a look at the pedal setup. On this car, unlike a modern car, on the right-hand side we have the brake pedal. On the left-hand side, the clutch like we have in today's car, but the throttle pedal is a button in the middle. So when one tried to do a heel and toe downshift, you put your foot on the brake pedal and literally flip the throttle by using your heel. And that's where the term heel and toeing came from.
Well, Carl, let's have a closer look at that 1932 Alfa you've got there. with a straight 8-cylinder engine, 2.6-litre capacity, and produces about 165 horsepower, which is incredible for a car built in 1932.
This car came out of Caracas, Venezuela a few years ago. It was owned by a man called Von Teffi with an obscure title. He was a count, and he was driving the car as his everyday car. Previously, in the early 50s, he had become South American champion in it. And Von Teffi was the second owner, so that makes me the third owner of this great car. Well, the car was the Formula One car of its day, one of 6 built by the great Alfa Romeo company. Actually, the team was run by Ferrari. One of Ferrari's first jobs was to run these Alfa Romeos, hence the prancing horse on the bonnet, or the hood as you call it over here. And these cars were all successful. They beat up on the Bugattis of the day like you wouldn't believe. A classic straight 8 supercharged engine, twin cam, producing about 165 brake horsepower, and the last car of the era where you carried a riding mechanic. So as we're not allowed to carry riding mechanics these days, I have to lean over and do the jobs of the riding mechanic as well as driving. So if during the weekend you just see a pair of white knuckles and know me, it's because I'm laying across the seat furiously pumping some more petrol through.
Talk about a busy drive.
Absolutely, you had to be a gymnast as well as a driver back in them days when cars were cars and men were men. Look at this site that was in paddock B of the Auto Jumble. An old MGA from homeland of Great Britain. From all that rust on it, looks like they must have driven it here through the sea. Not looking in the best of shape. Then there was this great frog-eye spike convertible set up with a roll bar for racing. Must have belonged to Alain Prost. You can find some very odd engines for the odd car. Parts to fit your ailing Fiat, or build one from scratch from the parts. Of course, you're going to need an instruction manual, of which there are thousands here. And if you can't do that, you'll have to build one on a very much smaller scale. Some great models. And I'm sure you'll be able to find your favorite pin, Mike. How about it?
In the Lime Rock Auto Jumble, you might find the car of your dreams for sale. And if that car is old and British, there's everything here to put it back together. A hood for an MGA, a horn push for an MGB, steering wheels, early sales literature, Coney shock absorbers and camshafts, and a heater valve. There's 30 bucks worth. For an MGA, here's a block and a head. And for a Jag XKE, if you put a rod through the side of your block, pop this one in it, complete with dipstick. A little bit of gourmet food going on here, too. Rocker panels for Jaguars, cam covers, and something I've been looking for. A combination oil pressure and water temperature gauge for an Austin Healey Sprite. How much today?
$125. Mail order house is $175.
Take 110?
I'm not that bored.
115?
Yeah, probably.
Sold.
Well, you remember our seagoing, rust-ridden MGA? Well, Carl Lopez has been touring the paddock and looks like he may have found a buyer for it.
Fellas, think you found a bargain here?
Well, we don't know the price yet, so we don't know whether it's a bargain or not. It looks really like a parts car, and, you know, if the price is right, we're very interested.
Now, from my point of view, being a non-expert, it certainly doesn't look to be what you'd call cherry.
Well, hardly. But then again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. As a matter of fact, my race car was worse than this, and it's on the track today.
What are you considering buying?
That's a two-way silencer. Well, you can hook this up to a lever in your cockpit and have run either a straight pipe or a muffled effect. So these two are packed with shavings, so it acts like a muffler. And then you can open this up, and it cuts those off, and it comes out like a straight pipe.
It's terrific. You going to buy it?
I'm thinking of it. I'm trying to think which car I could put it on.
I'll let you have them both for $45.
Thank you very much. Both of these things?
No, for $85. Both for $85. You can't beat it.
I'll come back.
Huh?
I'll come back.
You come back tomorrow.
I'll be here tomorrow.
$45. The boss will sell it to you for $60.
40.
You better buy it
42.
before he gets back.
42.
All right, give me $44 and call you.
You drive an extremely hard bargain.
Tom Cotter came to Lime Rock from Charlotte, North Carolina to feed his passion for British cars. Now, how big is the great steel fleet now?
Up to 11 as of Thursday.
MGs and Morrises and what all?
Oh, Porsches and Austin Healeys and Volkswagens.
Okay, so what'd you find here that's going to make Pat mad when you come home with the empty wallet?
Well, I didn't need this, but I mean, 65. I actually got it for $60. It was a fuel pump that the guy next to him wanted 125 for. That's for the TD. MGB 63. I got these taillight lens rims.
I like that one.
Yeah, it's not bad. I collect toys, and this was a 250 Ferrari.
How much?
It was originally 12. I got it for 5.
Such a deal.
Yeah. Whoa. Window winder for a 63 MGB. That was $3.
And they break all the time.
Right, so I bought spares. What is this?
You don't know, but you bought it anyway.
It was cheap. Okay.
That's the way it is here at the Auto Jumble.
Oh, that's it.
Oh, a pedal pad.
Yeah, for an Austin Healey, $1. How can you go wrong?
Cheap at half the price.
Yep.
Well, Mike, here's a car that wouldn't be cheap even at a quarter of the price. Look at this Ferrari 340 America, built in 1950. Its 12 cylinders produce about 350 horsepower with a top speed of 160 miles an hour. This car had to be thoroughly and painstakingly restored, and here's what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like now. Absolutely wonderful.
The car was built in 1949, a prototype, or mule as the Ferrari factory called them. The first Lampredi engine is sitting in the chassis. Lampredi was Colombo's understudy, who said there's a better way to make a racing motor. Instead of the Formula One cars with a 1.5 liter, let's go up to 4.5 naturally aspirated. That's the first chassis, first motor to carry this combination. I bought the car at the age of 15 when I was in 1965. This car was restored by me, a 19-year-old, 26 years ago, and I've had it ever since.
And now it's worth nearly $1 million, and he races it here at Lime Rock. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Lime Rock Park, Connecticut. Mike Joy with David Hobbs looking at some of the beautiful cars of the BMW Vintage Fall Festival.
And here's my dream car as a boy, Mike. A Jaguar XK120 built in 1951. 6 cylinders with a 3.4-liter displacement and a top speed of 140 miles an hour. This car's been driven by a couple of great race car drivers, as owner Nicholas Jones tells us.
I bought this car in 1986 from Brian Redmond, the well-known sports car driver. He, in fact, raced it in vintage events in Florida for a couple of years before that. I believe the car was built as a vintage racer in New Jersey some 10 years ago. And I know for a fact that Chip Robinson, who's recently been IMSA champion in the States, raced the car in 1981 at Road Atlanta. And when we got the car, we discovered there were so many things wrong with it that we were amazed that Brian Redmond went as quickly as he did when he raced it before me. It obviously just demonstrates what a good driver he is. I suppose when I was younger, I couldn't afford to race. And now that I'm vintage, I can afford it, and therefore I'm enjoying it before it's too late.
No, it's never too late to enjoy cars. David, some folks like to race them and others just like to show them off. Welcome to the Sunday Concours d'Elegance. Vintage cars so perfectly restored and shine so bright they'll blind you.
Well, you just can't believe how clean they are, and the work that goes into restoring each detail is absolutely stunning. Well, Karen Miller's in charge of the Concours d'Elegance, and she's here to tell us just a little bit more about it.
The best way to describe a Concours d'Elegance is to call it a beauty show or a Miss America pageant for cars. Cleanliness plays a large part in determining who the winners are going to be, and the judges really do apply a white glove treatment. But authenticity of restoration and maintenance of original materials, along with cleanliness and condition, are pretty much the criteria that we apply.
And when you consider most of these cars are 30 years old or more, what beautiful condition they've been brought back to.
Well, of course, one of the main implements these guys use, of course, is a toothbrush. You can't believe the places they clean on these cars. Talk about eating your dinner off the top of the engine. Some of these cars here, I'd be very happy to eat my dinner off the top of the engine. Just look at that interior work on that Mercedes-Benz.
That's a matched pair. There's a Gullwing Coupe and a Roadster.
Beautiful, but very, very expensive cars nowadays. But what a job these guys do. And they spend absolutely hours and hours doing this work.
Carl Lopez learned some of the tricks of the trade.
No particular trick, just try and clean it up and get the dust of the paddock off it, and of course the Bentley looks pretty dirty or clean.
And the best trick is I bring a crew with me and they get in charge of cleaning the car.
There's so many different cleaners, there's so many different polishes on the market today that 15 years ago showing a car had tricks. Now those tricks are all commercial products.
A lot of elbow work and a little bit of cleaner. accentuate the best points and cover the bad points.
The big trick is a 5-year-old little girl with tiny little fingers, and she can get in there. And she did it yesterday with a chamois. And she got in with a chamois and a brush, and she got it all clean. Each wheel is a quarter. It's not a bad deal.
25 cents a wheel. I think a quarter a spoke would still be a good deal. Judging these cars must be a truly difficult task. Let's follow along a team of judges and listen in.
We have a 1964 Mark III Austin Healey, and we're going to start judging the engine compartment. The engine compartment has 5 categories. At this time, we'll look at the first one, which is the condition and cleanliness of the bright metal.
Okay, this is all original. It's been polished. Copper tubing. What's the point value for this category?
Point value is 9 points.
9 points. Dirt here on the top of the dash pots. Well, we're talking about maybe a point off.
Yeah.
Okay. About an 8-point cleanliness. What else?
All right, the next category is exhaust manifolds and downpipes.
Okay.
Which is on your side over
right.
And a little bit of rust there.
Right, there's rust particles.
But it looks correct, though, as far as the brass nuts here and things like that.
And the washers are correct. Okay.
Point value here is 4 points.
3.5.
Okay, we'll make it a 3.5.
Okay.
The next one is the sheet metal, firewall, radiator shell, valance, underside of bonnet, and visible frame and suspension.
Okay, the bonnet's got a chip out of here. There's edge here.
Some here
on the spring.
Okay.
There's chips down in here.
I see lots of bugs here in the radiator shell. You notice these bugs over here?
Right, because there will be some that are clean.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, the point value here is 7. So,
5.5, 6.
Yeah, we'll take off 1.5 points.
Point and a
Is that
half.
agreeable?
Right.
All right, we'll make that a 5.5.
Picky, picky, picky. Well, as you walk past these cars, it's tough to tell which ones would win by a 1/10 of a point. But we picked a few of the winners to show you. Janice Ferretti's Lotus Elan took Best Interior. David Coffin's Allard J2X, Best Exterior. Jeff Glassero, Entrance Choice for Best Motorcycle. And the Best in Show, the 1962 Cobra of Ken Ebert. As beautiful as the concourse cars are, all the more beautiful to see them out on this racetrack at Lime Rock at speed. David, back in the paddock, some more beautiful vintage race cars.
Absolutely, they just fill this paddock area. Look at this 1953 Maserati, 6-cylinder, 170 horsepower with a top speed of 145 miles an hour, worth about $1.5 million today. It has a great story behind it. Let's hear it.
It was a real story and one of those once-in-a-lifetime situations. I went down there, and this woman was very much like the woman in Driving Miss Daisy, a real character, but a delight. She had put the car away when her husband passed away in 1957, and the car, I was the first one to open the barn doors in all those years, and the car just was magnificent. We've taken the better part of a year to bring it to its former glory, but it was a great thing to begin with.
Talk about beautiful things. Turn some of the world's greatest artists loose on some great race cars, and what do you get? Stay with us. There are a lot of beautiful cars at the BMW Vintage Fall Festival, but we asked the real judges, the race fans, if they could drive home just one, which would it be?
I'm really not sure. There's a Austin Healey that's a pretty interesting car that I saw just drove by. It's pretty fast.
I like too many of them. I guess I know too much about the cars. Probably the 850i that's up top there. Really nice.
I'm basically an Italian car guy, but so I'd have to say that some of the racing Ferraris that are here this weekend.
I like the two Alfa Romeos over back there.
Probably a Ford GT40.
Yeah, there's a Formula 5000 Lola down there that's just eating away at me.
And there's a beautiful BMW 507, the standard bearer of the line in the mid-1950s. Did you drive this one home, David?
I wish I could, Mike, but at $250,000, it's a bit rich for me. Speed 125 miles an hour, 150 horsepower out the V8. Jeff McAllister's had this car for quite a long time, but the price has been fairly high, as we're going to hear from him.
I've had the car since I was 19 years old. Yes, bought it out of my grandfather's collection years ago and just had it stored in all my friends' barns and garages until they just couldn't take it. And had the car for 5 girlfriends, 2 fiancés, and a wife. About 5 or 6 years ago, we brought it to one restoration shop in Pennsylvania who completely took it apart and pushed the hulk out into a field and had weeds growing up through the chassis. When my wife and I stopped down at a surprise inspection, we saw the car like that, immediately pulled it away that day, and found a more competent restorer who took 4 years to restore the car.
Well, we've been down in the paddock. Some of the most beautiful cars here are up in the parking lot and under the tent on the hillside. Here's David Hobbs.
Welcome to the BMW used car lot. Nice 1975 CSL. No rust, but I must confess it's had a paint job. In 1975, BMW decided to mix fine cars with fine art, and Alexander Calder put his mark on this CSL, and not only did he just paint it, they went off and raced it at Le Mans. Well, it seemed like such a good idea that more cars followed suit, and Frank Stella, Roy Lichtenstein, and finally Andy Warhol all put their mark on BMWs. This BMW M3 was done by Ken Doane, the famous Australian artist and fashion designer. A very, very colourful job, one might say. This is the Roy Lichtenstein, also a BMW 320 Turbo, and this is Frank Stella. He felt that geometric patterns had to be installed on a BMW race machine. And finally, we come to the jewel in the BMW crown, the all-new 850i. V12 engine, 300 silky horsepower, and the manufacturers have had to govern it to a measly 155 miles an hour. And at $73,000 and change, it's just the sort of car you'd expect to see a TV commentator sitting in about to drive off. Sorry? What do you mean, your car? Do I?
The BMW art cars will be on display now through January right in Manhattan at the BMW Gallery, 320 Park Avenue. Art is also a big part of the Vintage Fall Festival. Canadian Terry Thompson was commissioned to do the annual poster, and this art show at the Interlaken Inn features the work of several artists. Penny Havard's work shows great feeling and detail.
I think racing has been a very important part of American history, and people like William Vanderbilt, who started the Vanderbilt Cup, are responsible in some part for the road racing we have today and the vintage racing we have today. And what I'm trying to do with my work is sort of a dual thing, which is show people what racing used to look like and also talk to them visually about the people who were involved and what type of individuals they were as compared to the kind of people who race in today's cars.
Artist Sandra Leitzinger is from an IMSA GT racing family, and she paints from a different perspective.
It all comes out of the heart. It's my particular point of view. If you will look through the paintings that I've done over the years, they're the things that I see from where I am. They're not out on the glory corners where people are cornering and making their valiant passes on one another. It's what I see, the crews at work, some of the heartbreak, cars breaking down, that kind of thing.
All this great art, once the show is over, goes to the Auto Art Gallery in Sharon, Connecticut, where it's available for purchase.
(1956), Lotus 11 Le Mans. 4 cylinders, only 115 horsepower, but 140 miles an hour. Truly one of the first really aerodynamic cars. Colin Chapman was a great inventor, a genius designer, in fact.
And a very difficult car to restore, David. That unpainted aluminum body would show every flaw. Canadian Brian McEachran owns it.
Well, this is my all-time favorite race car. It's a 1956 Lotus 11. I'm from Canada. In those years in Canada, this was considered the ultimate sports racing car, something like a GTP car today. And I always loved the appearance of it. And as a matter of fact, Frank Costin, who was an aerodynamic engineer, designed this for Colin Chapman. First time airplane aerodynamics were used in a race car, and it works. a young man came up and he took one look at the car and he went, "Wild!" You know, that was neat. That's what I think too. Wild.
And there it is at speed, looking very wild indeed. We'll have more beautiful cars and some great racing when we come back.
Welcome to the BMW Fall Festival at Lime Rock Park, Connecticut, and what a wonderful day it is. GT40, year 1966, a Ford 289 V8, 425 horsepower and 200 miles an hour. Well, I can tell you that's a bit slow because in 1968 we were doing 210. Paul Reisman owns his car.
Well, the car was built in 1966 and was originally consigned to Alan Mann Racing, which was the racing arm for Ford Motor Company. It was then, I believe, sold back to Shelby as a parts car. He didn't need it, went right back to Alan Mann, and then purchased by Paul Hawkins, who was one of the factory racers for Ford Motor Company. Paul Hawkins raced it extensively, and then ultimately was sold to a number of racers, and was raced, I guess, through 1971. Then a number of vintage racers acquired the car, and I ultimately bought it a couple of years ago.
There's one much like it in the Henry Ford Museum. I'd rather see them out here racing once again. David Hobbs takes us to some cars that he knows better than anyone.
There's over 370 vintage and classic racing and other cars registered this weekend up here at Lime Rock for the BMW Vintage Fall Festival. As its name implies, it's sponsored by BMW, and of course they're one of today's finest luxury car manufacturers, but their roots are very much in racing, and BMW North America have done their fair share of racing too, and they have their own display of the cars that they have raced over the years here at Lime Rock. And I have raced, I might say, all of these cars in this display, I'm proud to say. But the one that I've really the favorite was this one here, the 1977 BMW 320i Turbo. This was an absolutely great car to drive, tremendous front engine, rear-wheel drive, turbocharged, and gave towards the end of its life about 650 odd horsepower, getting me to some 8 wins and some 9 track records. So this has got to be one of my favorites. One of the more interesting cars from a historic point of view is the one on my left. This was the very first GTP. All IMSA racing now in North America is run to the GTP rules. That's a Grand Touring prototype. And this BMW, the chassis was built for them by March, but it also had the turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, and that again is a very historic car. The 1976 CSL, which set the NASCAR boys on their ears when Stuckey raced it around Talladega in the wet, and of course was the champion that year. And this is the 1986 GT prototype with the same 4-cylinder turbo, now giving 1100 horsepower. And finally, the Group 4 BMW M1. This car did just one race, the 1981 Daytona 24-hour, a classic race and a classic car. It did just that race. They restored it and put it away and keep it on show. So in this BMW race car tent, you've got a real encapsulation of BMW's North American racing car history.
And history of our favorite British driver, David Hobbs. You know, with so many great contemporary race cars available and great racing series, why do these drivers choose to race old cars?
Just the excitement and the pleasure you get from cars of this era, the sounds, the smells. Anybody who's involved with it, I guess, has the same feeling and emotion.
It's valuable to me as a vintage racer, not as a show car. So that's what it was built for racing, and that's why we take it out.
It's amateur motor racing sport, and everybody is just having a good time, enjoying themselves, trying hard and caring about their competitor.
I get in it and I drive it, and it does the things you want it to do. I may not do it nearly as well as the drivers in the past, but I still get a big bounce out of it, real thrill.
It's fun to take it out and 50 years later have it doing what it was originally intended for.
Vintage car racing is, it's not so much the racing, but the people you meet. They're the most wonderful, friendly, helpful, really good comradeship is what it's all about. The racing is secondary.
Sounds like my sort of crowd. Well, now I'm vintage, I suppose I might as well get behind the wheel of some of these cars myself.
Harkens back to the days when the drivers were fat and the tires were skinny. Here's a good example. A Formula Junior built by the Cooper Works of Mini Cooper fame, 1961, and this little Coventry Climax 4-cylinder would push it to 145 miles an hour. Car's value today, over $100,000. back in the early 60s. And today, this car races at the hands of Doug Mockett.
Well, this car was one of the 1961 Formula Junior team cars for the Cooper Works team, run by Ken Terrell, who now, of course, has his own Formula One team. After the 61 season, it was sold to a gentleman named David Good, who is a one-armed hill climb man in England. He put a big 2.5-liter Coventry Climax engine in here and hill climbed it for several years. It was then sold to the Channel Islands, where somebody put a 4.5-liter Daimler V8 in it with giant tires and raced it on the sands on the beach. Apparently they do quite a bit of that in the Channel Islands. And about 4 years ago, it went back to England and was rebuilt back to its current and proper Formula Junior specifications. And as you see it now is exactly how it raced in 1961.
British racing green with the white Cooper stripes, just the way it should be. We'll be back with MGs in the British Austin Healey team when we return to Lime Rock Park after this. Welcome back to Lime Rock Park in Connecticut. I'm Mike Joy along with David Hobbs, and we'll let our vintage British driver tell us about this next vintage British car.
Well, there you see a real car, a 1936 MGPB. 4 cylinders and a whopping 43 horsepower, but 80,000 bucks. Thomas Fair, the current owner, has a very humorous story behind his pre-war car's restoration.
This car originally in 1936 was ordered from the factory as a race car, and that's a fact that I found out after I bought the car and did all the history on the car. I bought the car sight unseen out of a chicken coop in Illinois, and I arranged for a 40-foot transporter to bring it here to this guy who was supposed to be this great pre-war MG restoration guy. I flew my plane down to Connecticut to meet the guy. He drives me to his house, and it's another chicken coop. So the car had to go from one chicken coop 1,500 miles away to another chicken coop, where it spent another 3 years in restoration.
It's a beautiful car, and it certainly has not been in a chicken coop since. Some things haven't changed since Lime Rock was built in 1957. The winner still gets the trophy, the champagne. He may get some money, but he definitely gets the girl.
Hold it. I get the girl. Vintage racing is great fun, but the guys who are probably having more fun than any are the people from Team Healey. And Team Healey is made up of Americans, Germans, and English. The guys from overseas have been here all summer. They've traveled all across the United States, and they've got one more race to go, and they're having great fun while they're here in the USA.
That's what they've given me for the whole trip so far. 5 months in the USA, 20 bucks.
Well, it's hard to believe that motley crew have a leader, but they do in fact, and his name is John Chatham.
Two of us were down in Monterey about 4 years ago at the classic race meeting down there, Laguna Seca, and the gauntlet was really thrown down there and then, and we said we're coming over, and they said you'll never make it. Well, we made it. We built 3 cars to start with as a team of 3 to copy my very historic ex-Works team car, and then a few other guys, so we said come on, let's make a gang, and we brought 11 cars over.
I grew up with an Austin Healey at the age of 16. I had one, and I've been racing one ever since, so I like that era, and there's a little bit of art to it, there's passion to it, it's good racing.
Well, it's 2 wins apiece, 2 to the Americans, 2 to the English, and 1 race left. Who's going to win that?
How about a photo finish, John?
Well, we're good buddies. We'll just hold hands over the over the finish line. I'll be a gentleman and just no, I won't.
You're not going to start now.
Great fun with the Healey racers. You know, some of these cars are so valuable. We had Carl Lopez ask some drivers if the racing was a little gentlemanly or not.
A little bit. I'm going to be careful. I'm not going to go as fast as I think the car has an ability to go. But I'll watch myself. I think everything will be all right.
Well, one's always concerned about damaging the car and possibly damaging oneself as well.
The attitude, particularly at this event, is to go out and have a good time, drive the car with maybe 8/10 of its potential and less of mine, I guess.
Well, when I bought the car and had it restored, it really wasn't worth that much. So I just considered it really another car to drive on the track.
Aren't you concerned about taking it out on the racetrack and mixing it up with other drivers out there?
No, not at all. Not at all. It never occurs to you.
After all, it's just metal. and you can fix metal. So if something goes wrong, we can fix it, but touch wood, it's considered bad form to have something go wrong, by the way.
And bad manners, but they are race cars.
Yes, it may be just metal on the outside, but there's flesh and blood inside.
Here's one you may not recognize. Bill Thomas designed the Cheetah as a Chevy-powered Cobra beater. The small block V8 pumped out over 400 horsepower. Intended as a production car, but only 8 were built for road or track use. Skip Gunnell has restored this one from the ground up to bring it back to race-ready condition and bring it here to Lime Rock.
I first saw a Cheetah at Road America in '65. Second time I saw a Cheetah actually was this car at a vintage race in, I think it was Road Atlanta in about 1984. And admired the car, and it came up for sale again in Auto Week about 2 years later. And called the guy up, asked him if it was still in the same shape. He said, yep, it was just as good. And I said, then it's sold.
More Vintage Festival, including the 70 Trans Am Recreation, when we come back. Well, David, before we get to our Trans Am Recreation, what vintage show would be complete without a touch of French racing blue?
And there you see the Bugatti, one of the most evocative names in racing and, in fact, car building. Straight 8-cylinder, 145 horsepower from way back then, and 130 miles an hour. Estimated value quite a bit. A very, very valuable car, this. Donald Coleman's got quite a story about its restoration for us.
Well, the car was built originally in about 1926, and when it came off the production line, as far as we can tell, it was retained by the Bugatti factory as a team race car. And then we don't know an awful lot about it, but it stayed in New England during most of its career. And then it sort of retired for a while, and I got it about four and a half years ago, and very slowly or quickly went after the engine to get it running again. So completely rebuilt that, and every year rebuilt another component till I'm satisfied with the car as a very good, sorted out race car right now.
Trackside, the Trans Am Recreation is on the grid. Ray Caldwell was team manager for Dodge in '70. Here's one of his many stories.
On one occasion, we made a mistake, and one of our bodies was left in the acid dipping tank over a weekend. Ended up very thin. We went to the first Trans Am, and I can remember Mark Donahue coming up and sticking his finger through the top of the car. I was trying to figure out how am I going to get rid of this guy, you know.
This was Lime Rock Park in May 1970 for the Schaefer Trans Am. On the pole, the red, white, and blue Javelin of Mark Donahue. Outside, Sweet Savage and the Cuda. Jim Hall's white Camaro comes up the outside as Parnelli Jones in the Mustang makes it 4 wide on the start. And Jones, from 5th on the grid, takes the lead over Savage, Donahue, and George Fulmer. Peter Revson's Javelin uncorks an engine. And it was left for Dan Gurney, Jerry Titus in the Firebird, Sam Posey in the factory Dodge Challenger. All to chase Parnelli Jones that day. Donahue's race also ended early at the uphill turn. Parnelli Jones went the distance, 146 laps, to take the checkered flag and $3,500. 1 year earlier, Sam Posey had won the Trans Am, and today sits on the grid once again.
Seat's wonderful. All the feelings are the same. It really feels great to be out here. I just wish we had a better chance to win it.
In 1970, the under 2-liter race was won by Gaston Andre's Alpha, but these cars were there. Rudge Cunningham brought them back from California.
Well, besides wanting to be 20 years younger myself, today takes me back there. It's just reliving the glory days of motor racing, and I just think it's the best thing going, or I wouldn't be here 3,000 miles from home.
So let's get to it and recreate 20 years of history. On the outside, David Tom in the Jim Hall Camaro. Here comes Dale Sale from Alabama. He now owns the Parnelli Jones Mustang that won here in '70, and he takes the lead on the start, just as happened 20 years ago.
Absolutely carbon copy, recreating that move, but already the lead's been taken away from him.
Up front, Brooke Bosgrove in the Mark Donahue Javelin. And right behind him, the Dan Gurney Cuda, now owned by Ed and Brian Skanes, and behind the wheel, former Le Mans racer Bob Grossman, who got up at 6:30 in the morning, flew to Lime Rock in a private plane to drive a car he'd never seen before.
Bob Grossman, I first met him back in 1961, I hate to say this, at Daytona Beach, Florida. And,
racing a Ferrari, no doubt.
Exactly. Trying to sell me one. Looks just exactly the same today as he did then.
Grossman's out in front. Sale is second in the Parnelli-Jones car, and there's Sam Posey driving the car he won with at Lime Rock in 1969. Then David Tom in the Jim Hall Camaro, and Patrick Ryan of Montgomery, Alabama, here in the 67 Mark Donahue Roger Penske Camaro.
Looking as good now as it did then. Grossman still leading.
It's an exhibition, or is it? Here is Sam in the Mustang, #1, really putting the pressure on Bob Grossman in the Dan Gurney car. Dale Sale right there in that orange Parnelli-Jones Bud Moore Mustang. Sam's going to try it the hard way on the outside in Big Bend.
That is the hard way. Big Bend is a tough turn, and it's a long one. Didn't quite manage to pull it up, but slipped up the inside to go into the S's, and tries it the long way around the first part of the S's as well. Sam's got to do well today. His mother's here watching him, and he better watch out.
Grossman with a little bit of a push there through the only left-hander at Lime Rock. Out of the uphill, and Posey has the lead. Grossman in second, Dale Sale third, and a smoking Brooke Mostrel fourth. One of the under 2-liter cars, Martin Hange, has snuck up there, and there are the battling BMWs from California once again. History repeats itself. The 69 winning car and driver get the checkered flag, the 70 winning car coming home second.
Never really thought I would drive a racing car again, and much less win a race or much less win one at Lime Rock. I realize it's an exhibition race. That should be said in fairness, I think, to all the other competitors. But to me, it means something, honestly, much more than that. And I know that when I raced, and we were racing together, David, it was unfashionable to dedicate victories, but it has become fashionable to do so. And if I might, I must admit I'm feeling pretty emotional. I drove a car that was Peter Revson's car, and he made the Trans Am so much of what it was, and Swede Savage and Cherry Titus and Mark and some of the other guys who were not privileged to have the enjoyment that I have had today. And I'd like to think of them now. I know I did it in the last lap or so. It's just wonderful that we can all get together like this, and I hope we can again sometime. But I really miss those guys.
This ESPN program.
At Lime Rock Park, after the last checkered flag had fallen, after the concourse cars had been safely tucked away in their trailers, time for the awards dinner and a chance to reflect on the weekend and what had transpired and all the great history that had been recreated. The British took home some champagne, awards and cups were given out, and two of racing's more famous pundits had this exchange.
Well, I must say, Sam, it was absolutely wonderful for us all to see you win a race again. Obviously, we didn't see you win many races before. It was just spectacular to see one more win under that old belt before you finally hang up the horn.
You know, one thing, of course, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the 1970 race. One of the things that I think highlighted that era of the Trans Am was that there weren't any damn foreigners.
The most coveted award of the weekend went to Nicholas Jones. It honors the memory of Jim Patterson, BMW's competition director and the man who set the specifications for Trans Am racing in the U.S. Highlights of the BMW Vintage Fall Festival at Lime Rock Park have been brought to you by BMW, the ultimate driving machine. For a thorough test drive, simply phone your nearest BMW dealer.
Apart from the amazing machinery here, the lasting impression here is fun. And Jim Patterson, of all people, would have been right at the forefront of the fun that we've had here this weekend. A great family weekend, too, I might add. A wonderful, wonderful spectacle.
And, David, I think it shows that you can go home again. For those of us with fond memories of the 1970 Trans Am, a great bringing together of tremendous race cars, car builders, and driving talent. A chance to see it all in action one more time. Our special thanks to the owners of these cars who have lovingly preserved history, and to the men who made them famous, especially those no longer with us. Our thanks for the memories. For Carl Lopez and David Hobbs, I'm Mike Joy. Thanks for joining us.